Welcome back to the programme. It's 8:30 here in Paris. Let's remind you of our headlines. The gunman behind last night's fatal police shooting in Paris showed no signs of radicalisation before the attack, according to the Paris prosecutor. But the 39-year-old had a long police history. 3 of the main French presidential candidates cancel their campaign commitments in the wake of that attack, but not Mélenchon. We'll be hearing from our correspondent, who's following the far-left hopeful. And Syria violated UN resolutions by lying about its chemical weapons store, says the US Secretary of State during a visit to Israel. Mattis promises diplomatic repercussions. Good to have you with us. I'm Belle Lupton here with tonight's Live from Paris. Our top story tonight, the gunman behind an attack on police here in Paris was not on any terrorism watch lists. That's according to the Paris prosecutor who spoke earlier. But the 39-year-old named as Karim Sharfi did have a long police history. Sharfi opened fire on police in the Champs-Élysées last night, killing 1 police officer and wounding 2 others. A passerby was also lightly wounded. The Paris prosecutor detailed Sharfi's criminal history, but emphasised he showed no signs of radicalisation.
I would clarify that Karim Sharfi was never considered a threat to national security. Throughout the almost 14 years that he spent in prison, he never showed any signs of radicalisation, nor did he appear to try to radicalise others.
Well, France 24's Claire Williams was at that press conference. She sent us this update.
More details have now been confirmed as to who that attacker was. Karim Sharfi, 39 years old, clearly a very violent man. He had been arrested, sentenced, found guilty on 4 separate occasions for various violent crimes. Back in 2001, he was sentenced for having shot at police officers as he was trying to steal a car. But what's crucial is that he was not on a terror watch list. In the more than 15 years that police knew who he was and knew that he was dangerous, they never found any links between him and any kind of extremism or radicalisation. But what we do know is that next to his body on the Champs-Élysées on Thursday night, the police did find a note in which he expressed sympathies towards the Islamic State group, and police found a note in which he had written down the addresses of various different police stations. So it was clear that he was after the police, he was targeting the police.
Well, last night's attack came as France is in full election mode. The first round of voting is on Sunday. The 11 presidential candidates were all on air when the gunman fired, taking part in a final TV interview show. Well, here to discuss their responses and the wider implications on the campaign, I'm joined by Asif Arif, who is a lawyer and author on terrorism here in France. Good to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
The first question really is on the candidates. Far-right candidate Marine Le Pen, and also to a certain extent the Conservative candidate François Fillon, have come under fire from the Prime Minister Bernard Cazeneuve for their responses, the way that they've reacted to these attacks. What did you make of the candidates' attacks last night and through the day?
I mean, I think the candidates react, for me, the best reaction was Emmanuel Macron's reaction, actually. It was not the far right or Marine Le Pen or François Fillon's reaction, which is to stop the democracy, the time to solve this terrorist attack. I don't think terrorism should guide us in our way of doing politics. I think Emmanuel Macron was right. We don't feel that we should stop everything because a terrorist attack happened. And actually, that's what Daesh want. Daesh want to divide us. Daesh want to create some exceptional measures here in France. And that's what we should not do. So it shows again that, to me at least, Marine Le Pen, sorry, and François Fillon were wrong on this one.
But I mean, of course, we can't deny the timing of this attack. We're just 2 days before last night. We're 3 days before the first round of voting on Sunday. This is obviously seen as a gift, really, for the far right, because they are tough on crime, they are tough on security. Do you think that those far right candidates, so I'm talking about Marine Le Pen and, again, to a certain extent, François Fillon, are going to gain because of this?
No, I don't think so. I think French people are more intelligent than that. You know, we are not going to vote for one person just only based on the security measures. Of course, this is a very important task that we have to deal with. But the thing is that French people are not that into that state of mind to saying, okay, because a terrorist attack happened yesterday, we're going to vote far right. We're going. Again.
But I mean, we do see this often, you know, when there are attacks, it plays on voters' fears. Again, we've had Donald Trump just in the last few hours coming out and saying that this attack will affect the French election. He hasn't yet endorsed a candidate, but he's sort of adding to the flames, stoking the flames on that fire.
Donald Trump cannot really talk about it because he didn't vote the popular vote. He just won through a mechanism which is included into the American Constitution. Here we have a very straightforward way of looking things. You know.
So you're saying essentially the way that the French vote, which is the top two candidaats from the first round going through to the second, means that this couldn't.
And it even can be not a gift, actually, a poisoned gift for Marine Le Pen, because people can see that her only program is based on security, and there is nothing about economics. There is nothing about anything else that is the actual main thing of French people, how we are going to feed our family at the end of the month.
But if voters are frightened into thinking only along security lines and criminal lines, then she would be the candidate to vote for, even despite not having necessarily an economic policy or...
Not necessarily. I mean, there is Emmanuel Macron, there is Jean-Luc Mélenchon, there is a lot of other candidates who are proposing stuff against terrorism, you know. It's not like Marine Le Pen is the only one. I don't think closing borders, for example, would be the best solution against terrorism. The best solution will be a more stronger European Union, for example. So we have many other candidates who are proposing many other things on terrorism, and I don't think we should focus on the one who raised the more upper voice, you know. It doesn't mean that it will be effective. The effectiveness will pass through a very cohesive and very united policy on terrorism. And that's what we need to do. Actually, on the aftermath after this attack, what we need to do is to stay united and not become divided, because then we'll really make the game that Daesh want us to play.
So essentially terrorism feeding into populism. Asif Arif, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. Thank you, as ever, for coming in and talking to us about that. Asif Arif, who is a lawyer and author on terrorism in France. In Afghanistan, Taliban fighters have killed more than 50 Afghan soldiers as part of an ongoing attack on a mosque compound inside an Afghan military base. That's according to US military sources. It's unclear how close US-led coalition troops are to the fighting, but US military says this significant strike was aimed directly at the mosque and neighbouring dining facilities. In the US, the Defence Secretary has spoken out against Syria during a visit to Israel. Jim Mattis accused the Syrian government of violating UN Security Council resolutions by lying about having gotten rid of its chemical weapons supply.
The bottom line is there can be no doubt in the international community's mind that Syria has retained chemical weapons in violation of its agreement. And its statement that it had removed them all. There is no longer any doubt.
Well, all this comes 2 weeks after a suspected gas attack in Syria killed more than 80 civilians. The US responded quickly with a strike against a Syrian government airbase, an action that Israel supported. Well, for more on that, let's go live now to our Washington correspondent, Philip Crowther. And Philip, the Trump administration upping the ante there on Assad once again. Is this a warning to the Syrian government not to try another chemical attack?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it is. It is, though, a warning that we had heard before. US Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis saying that Syria and the regime of Bashar al-Assad would be ill-advised to use those chemical weapons that the United States, of course, is convinced Syria has. And this is also a response to the last words we heard from the Syrian president, Bashar al-Assad, in the last interview he gave, when he said that Syria doesn't have any chemical weapons. So this is a case of rhetoric being used by the United States, clearly a warning. What this is also from Jim Mattis is a criticism of the Obama administration and Russia, because they are the ones who believed and said that Bashar al-Assad had listened to them and had got rid of all chemical weapons in Syria. That clearly, according to the United States and Israel, alongside whose defense minister Jim Mattis was speaking, is not the case. And speaking of the defense ministry of Israel, well, it says that Syria has altogether 3 tons of chemical weapons. And that's one of the other reasons why we hear these harsh words from Jim Mattis. It's to show a united front here between the United States and Israel.
Philip, I just want to ask you about something else. We're getting reports that US forces have killed a close associate of the Islamic State group's leader. Can you tell us any more about that?
Yeah, there's confirmation actually of that from Brett McGurk. Brett McGurk is the special envoy for the United States for the anti-ISIS coalition. That's the group of militaries and countries that are fighting the Islamic State group. And what Brett McGurk says here is that this attack by US forces was actually 15 days ago. It was on the 6th of April. He says the man who was killed was an ISIS operative and someone who was close to the Islamic State leader, Baghdadi. He, according to the US military, was one who was organizing Islamic State attacks abroad, and indeed was, it seems, according to the US military at least, the mastermind of one of the deadly attacks of the recent past, one on a nightclub in Istanbul on New Year's Eve. We were speaking about the message and the rhetoric, the warning from Jim Mattis, the US Defense Secretary. Well, here's one from Brett McGurk, the US Special Envoy for that coalition that's fighting the Islamic State group. He says this in a tweet that was sent out not too long ago. He says this: "We will reach you anywhere." So a message there for possibly the leader of the Islamic State group, Baghdadi, who is still on the loose.
Philip Crowther in Washington, thank you for bringing us that update. Now, police in Germany have arrested a 28-year-old man in connection with a triple bomb on Dortmund football team's bus last week. Investigators were alerted to the German-Russian citizen because he'd taken out a 5-figure loan to bet that Borussia Dortmund's shares would drop just before the attack took place. Sanam Chantier reports.
It was a terror attack with a difference, a plan to get rich quick, but one that wasn't well thought out. Germany's anti-terror police have detained a 28-year-old German-Russian man who is suspected of detonating 3 bombs that targeted the Borussia Dortmund football team bus on April 11th. He had hoped the attack would send the club's shares plummeting, meaning he would pocket as much as 3.9 million euros.
We traced him through suspicious option purchases. At this point, we know that the accused bought 3 different derivatives on Borussia equities, with which he bet on falling stock prices. Most of these were bought on April the 11th, the day of the attack. In order to buy those derivatives, the accused took out a loan of tens of thousands of euros.
Traders at the stock market in Frankfurt reacted to the news on Friday.
This crime is not only disgusting and shocking, but it's also stupid. Buying put options already attracts attention, especially if it's done before an attack. We are currently faced with a tight market. After the global financial crisis, all banks had to register every single deal, every single client transfer.
Buying put options gives the trader the right to sell a stock at an agreed price. So if the stock drops, the trader can use the option to sell the shares at the higher price. By then buying them back at the lower price on that day, he earns a profit. Authorities had initially assumed it was the latest in a string of jihadist attacks to shake Europe, after finding notes at the scene claiming responsibility on behalf of Islamic extremists. They had even detained an Iraqi man living in Germany.
And finally, something to put the wind back in your sails. A father and son team have broken the record for the time taken to cross the Atlantic from Dakar in West Africa's Senegal to Pointe-au-Pitre in Guadeloupe in the Caribbean. And they didn't just scrape in there. The Italian duo took 10 hours and 16 minutes off the previous record. Quite an achievement. Crossing the finish line in their catamaran that you can see there, they took in total 11 days, 1 hour and 9 minutes to complete the journey. Got to be precise about these things. Now look at that. Plain sailing for them. It's 9:15 here in Paris. Let's remind you of our headlines. The gunman behind last night's fatal police shooting in Paris showed no signs of radicalisation before the attack, says the Paris prosecutor. But the 39-year-old had a long criminal history. 3 of the main French presidential candidates cancel their campaign commitments in the wake of that attack. This 2 days before the first round of voting. And Syria violated UN resolutions by lying about its chemical weapons store. That's according to the US Secretary of State during a visit to Israel. Mattis has promised diplomatic repercussions. Time for Media Watch now with Emma James, who's here in the studio. Hi there, Emma.
Hi there.
And you've started by looking at some of the tributes that have been paid online to the victims of yesterday's attack.
Yes, because of course, when these kind of things happen, people can quite often become obsessed with who did it and why, rather than who suffered the ultimate consequences. Now, the man has been identified as 37-year-old Xavier Jougelet, 2 years younger than his killer. So you might imagine that in another life, they possibly could have been friends. Many images of him being shared online and in media on across the world, really, because he is certainly captured a lot of attention. This picture shows the tributes that are being left outside 102 on the Champs-Élysées, which is exactly where it happened. The New York Times explains a little bit about why this man has really captured hearts right now. He was a staunch defender of gay rights, a gay man himself in a civil partnership. He also helped migrants in Greece, and he's described as a straightforward man who loved his job. Now, Le Figaro are paying tribute to him and his bravery. And the reason that they talk in particular about his bravery is that not only did he suffer in that terrible attack yesterday, but he was called to the Bataclan on the 13th of November 2015. He was there in his official capacity to help with the aftermath of that. And he was also present when the venue reopened. And what he had to say then really is quite inspiring, I think it's fair to say. He said it's necessary to defend people's rights. We are here to celebrate life and to say no to terrorists.
Some very fitting tributes there, but as well as the tributes, there's accusations that have been flying around against some of the presidential candidates, accusations that saying that they are using this attack to make presidential or to make campaign gains, essentially.
Yes, absolutely. And it's not entirely surprising because, of course, politicians are going to try to use public events to their own ends. But there are some fairly strong accusations coming from the Prime Minister, Bernard Cazeneuve, who has made them principally against both François Fillon and Marine Le Pen. And he says they have chosen the route of exaggeration and division in the wake of the attack on Thursday night. Marine Le Pen in particular, he says, is shamelessly exploiting fear and emotion for purely political ends. Now, François Fillon tweeted this today: the fight against Islamic totalitarianism must be the absolute priority of the next French president, which sounds fairly it's nothing really that people have too much of a problem with. But he went on to say, we are at war. There is no alternative. It's us or them. And it's that us or them rhetoric that really is reinforcing the divisions that already exist in French society and that a lot of people aren't very happy about that he's talking about that. Marine Le Pen, on the other hand, says that France has to stop being naive and reinstate border checks. Just one of many things that she tweeted about this morning, or at least somebody did for her campaign, because there was a whole slew of tweets, one after the other, all advocating different moves, all basically fundamentally in the wake of this attack. One of them talked about the fact that there needs to be new rules to restrict immigration, asylum, and people seeking French citizenship. It all needs to be made much tougher. And she also tweeted this one: I demand the immediate expulsion of foreigners who are on the terror watch list, Fichier S, it's called over here. And that is something that made a few people scratch their heads because, of course, the man who carried out this attack on the Champs-Élysées was French. He was born in Seine-Saint-Denis, the same area as the Stade de France, where the national French and rugby games are played out. So he was very much a Frenchman, and he wasn't on the Fichier S list. He was flagged for various reasons. He'd been in prison, and there were concerns about him. But he wasn't on the terror watch list as such. So it does seem a strange thing to try to bring up, but clearly she's using it to very much push her agenda forward. Another one trying to push his agenda, Donald Trump tweeted today, another terrorist attack in Paris. The people of France will not take much more of this, will have a big effect on the presidential election. And people are seeing that as tacit endorsement of Marine Le Pen.
Well, and speaking of endorsements and those elections just 2 days away now, who, politically speaking, has the most to lose at this point?
Well, it's difficult to say because this whole election race has been so unpredictable, and it's possibly even more unpredictable now in the wake of that terror attack. The Economist's front page today, which of course was dreamed up before that happened on the Champs-Élysées, has a French cockerel saying "Zut alors," France's dangerous election, they refer to. But if we look elsewhere, it seems that Emmanuel Macron certainly is feeling the pressure. He says the choice that we have to make is a choice for the future. Do not surrender to fear. Now, you could really translate that as, please don't desert me now, because, of course, people might, out of fear, go for a tougher candidate, a candidate who's seen to be tougher on security, on terrorism, immigration, etc., etc. And that, of course, would be Marine Le Pen or François Fillon. The blog in The Spectator says that Macron is undoubtedly the one with the most to lose. They describe him as supposedly brilliant and boyish, if slightly odd, and they believe that people are starting to realise that he is just François Hollande's mini-me. And, of course, François Hollande, so unpopular that he didn't even stand for a second term. It will be very interesting to see how this plays out. It is so hard to predict. Absolutely,
still all of it to play for. Emma James with a roundup of how the media has been covering last night's attack and the presidential campaign there. Well, as part of our continuous campaign coverage here at France 24, we've been throwing the spotlight on issues close to French voters' hearts. For more than 10 million people in this country, fuel poverty is a huge problem. In today's focus, our team spent the day with an organisation that's trying to help the poorest families heat their homes.
It may look shut up, but this house isn't empty. Life hasn't been easy for Denis Rocancourt. An accident at work was followed by a divorce. Now in his 60s, with a small pension, he's struggling to make ends meet and has had to make sacrifices. For some years now, Denis hasn't been able to afford heating or even a hot shower.
The first year, my daughter gave me electric heaters, so it was warm, but the bills started racking up, so I had to turn them off. Now I don't open my shutters, and I don't move around much to stop drafts. This winter, when it was very cold in January, it was 9 degrees inside.
In an attempt to limit the biting cold, Denis doesn't go upstairs anymore. He has chosen to board it up.
See? It's all empty.
So you sealed the upstairs to stop being cold?
Yes, to stop the heat from rising here.
It's a makeshift solution to draft-proof the house, but Denis refuses to feel sorry for himself.
It might be freezing, it might rain, it might snow, but at least I'm at home. There are lots of people sleeping under bridges who'd be very grateful to be in my position.
Denis is one of the 12 million people in France who suffer fuel poverty. But an organisation, Eco Habitat, has stepped in. Denis has become something of a mascot for the charity, even appearing on their posters. Led by Franck Billot, Eco Habitat fights fuel poverty by renovating modest housing. The organisation helps the most disadvantaged people to navigate the system, putting them in touch with companies that will take charge of the renovations.
So they'll say to the person, give me your fiscal reference code, tell me what type of renovations you want to do, and exactly how you're going to finance it. These three questions put off disadvantaged people. They don't know what their reference code is, they have no idea what renovations need doing, or how to finance it when they're living off 650 euros a month.
So this is the result?
Yes, this is the finished house. It's not a palace, but the roof doesn't leak anymore, and inside we helped install a shower for an elderly lady. So there are sanitary facilities, heating. It's basic, but at least this lady can get through winter comfortably and have her children and grandchildren over.
Life-changing renovations, and not just in terms of comfort. Franck Billot takes us to see Martine, who has benefited from the organisation's help. Her roof has been completely redone.
I really feel it. It already feels warmer. It's less humid and there are no more leaks.
And how long have you lived here?
40 years.
40 years? And how long have you had this heating problem?
A while now. My husband died 10 years ago. It's been like this ever since.
Next up, the ceilings, window, and the old stove will be replaced. Fuel poverty is often just a sign of wider poverty. So aside from the comfort that the works have brought Denis and Martine, they've also had a beneficial psychological effect. Martine is able to have her grandchildren over, while after years in his boarded-up home, Denis will finally be able to open his windows again.
Plenty more still to come in the programme. We'll be taking you to Caracas after the break, where 12 people have died in anti-Maduro protests. Our correspondent will be giving us the latest from there. Do stay with us here on France 24.
Down to Earth, presented by